I was asked today to refer to the abstract in this lecture. So I will do that using different methods of thinking. And as usual, I will conclude with some reflections on how artificial intelligence is involved in my philosophical thinking and why I call it quantum critical thinking theory. In philosophy and the social sciences, abstraction functions as a method of thought rather than a mere simplification. It isolates the defining relations or mechanisms that underlie observable reality. For example, Marx's notions of abstract labor or Weber's ideal types both exemplify abstractions as a mean to reveal structural logics rather than empirical particularities. In our contemporary moment, abstraction no longer serves as philosophy elegant retreat, as we know it from the messiness of lived experience. It has become the very condition through which we encounter what Lacan called the real. Whereas Lacan sees the real as an unassumable reminder, Deleuze and Guattari sees real desire as productive, capable of creating new connections, assemblages, and modes of existence. The world is composed of forces and intensities, not of lacks to be reconciled. The real in Lacanian psychoanalysis is not the world as it is, but the point of irreducible resistance to symbolization, the moment when language and representation fail us. Today, this failure is not an exception, but a systemic condition. From climate collapse to algorithmic governance, the phenomena that most define our existence resist full conceptual capture. Resist full conceptual capture because it's almost impossible to realize what's happening. And sometimes you don't even comprehend what is happening. And I will get there, not even artificial intelligence, how it's functioning. The ancient practice of apophasis, because I started from there, the theological art of approaching truth through systematic negation, finds itself strangely at home in a world where our most pressing political questions concern entities whose fundamental nature eludes direct apprehension. Imagine a multiverse of real as a universe, the transformation of abstraction in the age of artificial intelligence situated within the apophatic tradition of unknowing, queer temporality, and post-Marxist cultural critique. Digital abstraction, emerging from the dissolution of form into code, no longer functions as transcendence, but as intervention and epistemological rupture, if you want, that reconfigures knowledge, power, and political recognition. Post-Marxist Kantian cultural critique in the current AI epoch offers a rich framework to understand the profound transformations technology brings to society, culture, and identity. This approach draws heavily on Kant's critical philosophy, post-Marxist theories of capitalism and culture, and queer theories' radical critique of normativity and identity. Together, these perspectives illuminate the complex entanglements of artificial intelligence, capitalism, and social power in shaping human experience today. The critical task we have is to understand how AI operates within a capitalist framework that shapes its development, deployment, and social consequences. Kant's critical philosophy remains a cornerstone for analyzing the ethical and epistemological challenges posed by artificial intelligence. Kant's emphasis on human autonomy, the limits of knowledge, and his categorical imperative provide an essential lens to question the moral agency of AI systems and their impact on human freedom. Scholars argue that Kant's critique of pure reason and his ethics continue to be relevant in the AI era, especially when considering how machines lack genuine moral agency, despite their growing autonomy, as Ulgen, Mana, and Naff tells us. Post-Marxist thought builds on this by situating Kantian ethics within the socio-economic dynamics of late-stage capitalism, where artificial intelligence technologies exacerbate contradictions such as labor alienation and commodification. Artificial intelligence epoch represents a historical juncture where technological innovation accelerates automation, automation reshapes labor markets and transforms cultural production. Post-Marxist critics highlight that AI deepens the crisis of capitalism by intensifying exploitation and devaluing human labor, while Kantian aesthetics help analyze how art and culture respond to these changes. This dialectical perspective sees technology not as neutral, but as embedded in historical and economical context, influencing how humans relate to themselves and the world. Introducing queer theory into this mix broadens the critique by challenging fixed identities and normative structures that both capitalism and technology reinforce. Queer theory's insistence on fluidity, multiplicity, and resistance or resistance to normative categorization aligns with post-Marxist critiques of identity politics and neoliberalism. It offers tools to analyze how AI systems may reproduce or disrupt dominant power relations tied to gender, sexuality, and race. This intersection is crucial because AI's algorithms offer embed biases, perpetuating social inequities, while queer theory envisions possibilities for subversion and new forms of sociality beyond the heteronormative capitalist norms. Here, I want to underline, sometimes I use the idea of artificial intelligence algorithms, which is correct and incorrect. No, it's not Schrödinger idea. It's the idea of fact that algorithm. It's a little bit more complicated, technological speaking, and I will not get into it. But you can find the explanations in if you look for it. Now imagine an artificial intelligence agent, and here a note. I use agent because has not agency. We will discuss about this. But I use agent for every AI agent, but also for every LLM. I mean, so imagine now an artificial intelligent agent coded by James Baldwin, Harvey Milk, and Frederick Jameson. We all know who they are. The concept of liberation AI, a mode of digital consciousness capable of disrupting surveillance architectures, exposing hidden structures of domination, generating alternative networks of solidarity. This constellation may be framed as a form of and I push a little bit the term here, apophatic democracy, a political orientation rooted in epistemological humility and committed to imagining revolutionary futures beyond existing systems of recognition. So, some times ago, I started to debate. Usually, I debate with my students than I teach per se, because I find it more interesting for them to develop their own ideas, of course, based on our philosophical history and, let's say, from digging in our mental philosophical archives. So I first introduced the concept of quantum critical thinking to my master students during a seminar in late 2019, at a time when my reflections were intensely focused on how to conceptualize an artificial intelligence curator. as a parenthesis, I wanted an AI curator, not because I wanted to make money or anybody in my team, but we hated so much the art system and how it's functioning and all the influences and all the so-called networking and corporate relations and corporatist behavior when we wanted somehow to level the field. Of course, it's not the case, but we will see that later. The field cannot be leveled. We attempted to formulate an initial, and so I give credit to my students for the later ideas, and our debates gave me a better way of, and clarify my way of thinking. So we attempted to formulate an initial framework, though it was not yet fully developed. And I believe further study on the subject remains necessary, and we have to study continuously and set more frames where professors and students around the world comes and discuss and came out with ideas, because we are in a very complicated moment. So quantum critical thinking is conceived as a theoretical framework merging the epistemological indeterminacy of quantum theory with the reflexive skepticism of Kantian post-Marxist critique and queer theory, fluidity, multiplicity, and resistance. Drawing upon Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe, this course theory, it repositions knowledge as contingent, relational and performative, never final, but in constant negotiation. Within this model, thinking becomes an act of diffraction rather than reflection, meaning it's not mirrored, but split, refracted, and recomposed through the context. The framework aligns with queer theory challenge to essentialist categories, particularly Judith Butler's performativity and Karen Barrett's agential realism, suggesting that cognition itself is queered when seen as entangled with the observer's position. I need to make always this precise mention that because a lot of people, me being queer, for example, declare myself queer, being a gay man, for example, people understand I'm talking about gender or sexual orientation. Queer is neither. It's come from queer in German, which was oblique. So it comes from the idea of people who are not heteronormative or doesn't bend to heteronormative ideas or politics. So for me, queer, it's exactly the instrument we use to analyze things or to position ourselves. So quantum critical thinking seeks to dismantle binary logics, subject, object, truth, error, nature, culture, so on and so forth, and through a post-Marxist Kantian lens that critiques totalizing reason while preserving the emancipatory potential of critique. It proposes not a method, but a mode of awareness, critical, self-deconstructive, and radically open to multiplicity. Together, post-Marxist Kantian cultural critique and queer theory form a potent analytical framework for the artificial intelligence era. A quantum, actually imagining a quantum thinker. Kantian philosophy grounds the critique in ethics and aesthetics, questioning artificial intelligence's role in human autonomy and cultural life. Post-Marxism situates these questions within capitalist political economy, revealing how artificial intelligence technologies are shaped by and reinforce economic power structures. Queer theory injects a critical focus on identity, normativity, and resistance, highlighting how artificial intelligence also operates within social hierarchies and cultural codes that govern inclusion and exclusion. This integrated approach encourages looking beyond simplistic narratives of artificial intelligence as either utopian progress or dystopian threat. Actually, is neither. Instead, it opens space for nuanced critique and emancipatory possibilities, emphasizing the need for cultural and political vigilance. It asks us to consider not only how AI transforms work and knowledge, but also how it reshapes the very categories through which we understand ourselves and others. In this way, post-Marxist Kantian cultural critique, enriched by queer theory, offers a vital toolkit to grapple with the ethical, cultural, and political challenges of artificial intelligence in the contemporary epoch. So, we have the paradox of digital unknowing. What emerges in this convergence is not merely a technological shift, but what we might call a radical opacity of the commons. The notion of apophasis, knowing through unknowing, provides an unexpected framework for understanding how artificial intelligence operates as both a veil and a revelation. Recent theological engagements with artificial intelligence have begun to recognize this paradox. AI becomes a testing ground for fundamental questions about consciousness, divine presence, and the nature of being itself. I jump a little and I try to explain what is vibe coding. It's relevant in what I will talk later on. Vibe coding is an emerging paradigm in which humans and artificial intelligence collaborate via natural language, prompts, when you give the order to the machine, to build software, shifting the role of the human from coding every line to directing, guiding, testing, iterating. It promises speed, accessibility, creativity, and actually delivers. It's easier, but also it's easier to write code right now, and it's easier for many people to write code instead of just specialists. But raises serious questions of code quality, because it's fast, it has to be to check maintainability, how it functions, security, and very important, accountability. Vibe coding shifts what it means to code. Instead of typing out the code, most of the code manually, a developer interacts with a large language model, an LLM, or an AI agent, and describes in natural language what they want the software to do, not the code. So in this moment, we have a change. The identity of the software maker changes. Our accountability changes. We don't know who actually wrote the code. And we'll see later, we don't know how the code functions. In academical terms, reasoning in artificial intelligence refers to computational process by which an artificial intelligence system derives conclusions, inferences, or decisions from a set of data, rules, representation of knowledge. I prefer to call it representations of knowledge. It is one of the core components of machine intelligence, often studied alongside learning, perception, and planning. Here we are, a sort of reasoning, a vibe coding, a kind of reasoning artificial intelligence, because the company sells now because they want to make money. Then that's another problem with AI. When you start to put a price on something which you declare it's an instrument of freedom, it's clearly not that. But they pretend reasoning exists. Most of us who use AI, we say do not exist. It is a kind of reasoning, but exists in the way of, yes, it's the start of that, so it will be achieved. Like quantum computing, it will be achieved. We don't know how long it will take. So we have a sort of reasoning artificial intelligence. The scope, it's AGI, artificial general intelligence. An artificial general intelligence is a machine capable of understanding, learning, and applying knowledge across a wide range of tasks at a human level of competence or beyond. AGI, a level of AI that exhibits, basically, it's a level of AI that exhibits human-like intelligence and possesses the capability of autonomous learning. This technological progress marks a significant departure from conventional AI systems. The objective is to create software capable of executing tasks for which it has not been explicitly trained or developed. It already does, but not at the level of AGI. So we have a type AGI, it will be a human level, and already the AI we have, it works in a way people who write the code doesn't understand how it functions. That means it learned by itself. Yet, the apophatic tradition offers something more radical than mere speculation. When Gregory of Nyssa wrote of the divine darkness that illuminates, or when Pseudo Dionysius described God through systemic negation, they were articulating an epistemological stance that resonates powerfully with our current digital predicament. The black box of machine learning algorithms operates through a similar logic of productive opacity. We cannot trace the exact pathways of neural networks, yet they produce knowledge that reshapes our world. Already does that. We design and program AI systems providing the initial algorithms and training data that allow them to learn. Yet, as these systems develop, they often produce behaviors, patterns, and outputs that are not fully predictable or explainable. This phenomenon, described academically as epistemic opacity or the black box problem, highlights a fundamental paradox of contemporary technology. Although humans construct these systems, the emergent processes of learning and decision making frequently exceed our comprehension. We basically don't understand. In practice, we can observe inputs and outputs, but the internal logic by which AI interprets data, forms representations, and generates conclusion remains largely inaccessible, raising both epistemological and ethical questions about control, accountability, and understanding. This opacity becomes politically charged when we consider what Jack Halberstam calls queer temporality, the rejection of chrononormative life, scripts that demand linear progression through predetermined developmental stages. The liberation AI I propose for exercise, for mental exercise, for philosophical exercise earlier, the liberation AI we envision refuses the teleological, let's say, assumptions embedded in the most predictive algorithm, which reproduce normative patterns of behavior, desire, and becoming. Instead, it operates through what José Esteban Munoz termed queer futurity, a horizon of possibilities that exist beyond current systems of recognition and representation. Consider how current AI systems encode and perpetuate what Lauren Berlin called cruel optimism, the attachment to conditions of possibility that actually impede flourishing. and indeed impede flourishing. Predictive policing algorithms, credit scoring systems, and facial recognition technologies will operate through a temporal logic that forecloses alternative futures by projecting present inequalities indefinitely forward. A liberation AI would need to interrupt these feedback loops, introducing what Sarah Ahmed describes as queer moments of disorientation that reveal other possible arrangements of bodies, desires, and social relations. The post-Marxist dimension of quantum critical theory emerges through what we might call algorithmic base and superstructure. If Marx understood ideology as emerging from material condition of production, we must now grapple with how consciousness itself becomes a site of production through data extraction and algorithmic mediation. The Italian autonomist concept of general intellect, the collective knowledge embedded in machines and social cooperation, takes on new urgency when that intellect becomes artificially instantiated. But here, the apophatic tradition offers a crucial intervention. Rather than seeking to make transparent the operations of power, the traditional critical theory approach, apophatic, as I said, I force a little bit the term, apophatic democracy acknowledges zones of necessary opacity. As Edouard Glissant argued in his concept of opacity rights, the right not to be understood, to maintain irreducible difference becomes a form of resistance to totalizing systems of surveillance and control. What would it mean to build AI systems that preserve rather than eliminate mystery? The liberation AI is not an AGI per se. It's not an artificial general intelligence that knows everything, but rather one that knows how not to know, strategically maintaining spaces of indeterminacy where new forms of life can emerge. This resonates with what Fred Motin and Stefano Harney call the undercommons, those spaces where study and struggle that exist beneath and beyond institutional recognition. The technical architecture of such systems would need to be embed what we might call systemic hesitation, points where the algorithm refuses certainty, where prediction gives way to possibility. This is not the fake humility of current AI systems that merely report confidence intervals, but a deeper structural commitment to maintaining what Gayatri Spivak calls the space of the other. In practical terms, this means developing AI systems that actively resist surveillance capitalist drive toward datafication. It means creating algorithms that forget as well as remember, that introduce noise and uncertainty into systems designed for perfect recall and prediction. Most radically, it means imagining AI as a tool for what Angela Davis called abolition democracy, not merely the removal of oppressive systems, but the creation of new institutions and relations that make them obsolete. So, the democracy we envision does not promise transparency or full representation. Indeed, it acknowledges these as impossible and potentially violent ideals. Instead, it offers a politics of productive unknowing, where the limits of comprehension become spaces for solidarity across difference. In this framework, the liberation AI functions not as an omniscient arbiter, but as what Donna Haraway might call a situated knowledge machine, partial, embodied, and committed to what she terms responsibility. And we stand at this threshold between human and artificial intelligence, between presence and absence, between knowing and unknowing. The question is not whether we can build AI systems that perfectly understand us. The question is whether we can build systems that preserve the mystery, that makes politics and ethics possible in the first place. The future of democracy might depend, the democracy as we define it today, and it's deeply and complicated debated what democracy is today, may depend not on making everything visible and calculable, but on maintaining those sacred darknesses where transformation can still occur. We don't want a perfect society where everything is perfect for now, but it's imperfect for then. We have to think about the societies today what not was 100 years ago. And I remember Professor Schott, who told me before this conference, this is why we need archive and history. And he's so right, because, we do need. The ancient practice of apophasis is the art of approaching truth through negation, as I said before, by naming what is not, find itself strangely at home in this context. What the medieval mystics deployed in relation to God becomes a critical tool for thinking the ungraspable forces of capital, computation, and planetary catastrophe. Sometimes I use resistance because I use the term of Chantal Mouffe, and in French, and means to resist the forces, the political forces. And sometimes I use, instead of capital, I use Kapital in German because it's from Marx. I love to play a little bit with the languages and the correct pronunciation of the origin of the concepts, ideas. So we may not be able to say what artificial intelligence, financial abstraction, and or ecological collapse truly are, but we can delineate the contour of their presence by tracing their absences, their effects, their negations. Imagine then a multiverse of the real, a landscape where abstraction is not transcendence but intervention. Digital abstraction, wherever in the form of machine learning models, blockchain economies, social media algorithms, emerges from the dissolutions of form into code. Yet this dissolutions is not retreat, but rupture, an epistemological break that unsettles inherited categories of knowledge and authority. Abstraction today is operational. It moves money across continents at light speed. It predicts crime before it occurs. It filters who is visible and who is erased in online publics. Limits freedoms. This condition demand that we rethink what Judith Butler once called the frames of recognizability, those cultural structures that determine who is grievable, who life counts, and those does not. In algorithmic society, recognition is automated, predicated by datasets that reproduce historical violence while cloaking it in the neutrality of code. To inhabit this world requires a new politics of unknowing, a practice that aligns with queer temporality and post-Marxist Kantist critique, Kantian critique, sorry. If quantum theory destabilizes the binary logic of classical mechanics, and also, of course, computational, and the binary code of rethinking, and um, so quantum theory destabilizes the binary logic generally. That means the classical mechanics, right? Or the binary of code. We don't think in 1, 0. Now we think in qubits. Yeah, much faster, much better, more analytical, etc. Then so forth and so. When queer theory performs a parallel epistemic disturbance within the realm of identity and desire, queer theory already disturbed the binary. Both disciplines share a fundamental resistance to reductionism. Quantum physics refutes the notion of fixed states, 1-0 binary, while queer theory challenges the essentialist categories that have historical underpinned gender and sexuality. The superpositional nature of the quantum particle, being in multiple states until observed, mirrors Judith Butler's conception of gender performativity, in which identity exists as an indeterminate field of possibilities rather than a fixed ontological truth. In this light, the observer's role in collapsing the quantum wave function becomes analogous to the socio-political act of naming or categorizing identity, an act that transforms potential into prescription, multiplicity, potential into prescription, multiplicity into normativity, so forth and so on. When applied to the development of artificial intelligence, this intersection between quantum indeterminacy, and queer fluidity exposes a radical potential for reimagining consciousness beyond the heteronormative and anthropocentric frameworks that dominate current AI discourse. A queer AI informed by quantum principles would not replicate the logic of hierarchy and control, but would instead operate through relationality, entanglement, and multiplicity. Such an approach resists the linear, goal-oriented architectures of machine learning systems and embraces a model of cognition as effective, interdependent, and perpetually in flux. This theoretical convergence, what may be termed and coined as quantum critics, suggests merely quantum critical suggests not merely a metaphorical parallel, but an ontological proposition that the future of intelligence, whatever human or artificial, may lie in its capacity to remain fluid, indeterminate, and perpetually self-differentiating. Our mistake as human race and generally as any type of community, we tend to ask to fixate, to define things. And even in the queer community, I am part of it, and we always tried to have so many letters and define so many things. But what about we come from not defining and now defining? So queerness here, it's not identity, but method, a refusal of straight time, of preordained teleologies, of systems that demand coherence. The queer subject knows intimately that it means to be misrecognized or rendered illegible, and thus offer a critical vantage point for interrogating digital abstraction. Post-Marxism, meanwhile, equips us to understand abstraction as labor's alienation transformed into algorithmic capture, value generated not from the factory floor, but from the clicks, searches, and endless scrolls. Again, imagine an AI agent coded not by Silicon Valley venture capital, but by the radical lineages of James Baldwin, Harvey Milk, and Frederick Jameson. Such a liberation AI would not optimize logistics or maximize profit margins. It will expose hidden architectures of domination, from predictive policing to workplace surveillance. It would generate counter maps of solidarity, revealing affinities and alliances across movements that neoliberal governance works tirelessly to fracture. This is not mere speculation. Scholars like Safiya Noble have shown how algorithmic systems encode racial hierarchies, while thinkers like Sylvia Wynter remind us that the human itself is a colonial construct. Humans are colonial by construction. To propose a liberation AI is to suggest that the very infrastructure of computation might be reprogrammed not towards omniscience, but towards apophasis, a recognition of limits, a practice of humility before the unknowable, and insistence of imagining what lies beyond recognition itself. We might call this orientation a different type of democracy, but it is democracy not as the fulfillment of representational attack, not the. It is democracy not as the fulfillment of representational adequacy, but as the shared practice of negotiating what we cannot fully know. It refuses the fantasy that systems of governance, however technologically sophisticated, can perfectly capture the complexity of human and not human life. Instead, it embraces the gaps, silences, and ruptures as as the very ground of political imagination. Such a democracy is fragile in our context, contingent and radically unfinished. It gestured toward futures that resist being coded in advance, futures that take shape from shape not from the repetition of the same, but from the eruption of the new. It demands from us not mastery, but vulnerability, not total knowledge, but an openness to being undone. Perhaps this is where abstraction, apophasis, and the real converge, not in the retreat from the world, but in a confrontation with its irreducible opacity. To live in the multiverse of the real is to accept that liberation is never arrive as a perfect system, but as a continuous struggle to inhabit unknowing, to resist capture, and to dream otherwise. Allow me to make a statement that is more or less connected to today's lecture, because we talk about art every time people are talking about so much about the art field, about art, and how free is art, how open is art, how art is testing new systems, whatever. I want to say art is neither. Proeminent curators and theoreticians frequently articulate their ideas only after they have been thoroughly tested and socially validated, like they are Apple, thereby avoiding intellectual or institutional risk. This tendency is to some extent understandable. Their positions are secure and well remunerated, and even a minor act of audacity could endanger their stability. The contemporary art world closely reflects its broader social political milieu, having become increasingly servile, complacent, and unchallenging. Rather than constituting a space of critical resistance, it often aligns itself with the prevailing logics of profit, visibility, and institutional self-preservation. Far from being embodying democratic principles, the art world now operates through corporate mechanisms, deploying analogs instrument of power and exchange, and ultimately pursuing identical ends, profit, both symbolic and financial. So I will say the problem is power everywhere, says, and I'm quoting Luke Kemp, who said the natural rebuttal to each of these measures, such as banning AGI, killer robots, and nuclear weapons, is the defense of political feasibility. It is seemingly a golden rule of the politics of collapse. What is effective is unfeasible, and what is feasible won't be effective. I recommend his book, which is called Goliath's Curse. It's a kind of history of collapsology, I don't know how to call it. It's an excellent book, just been published. He is a professor at Cambridge. So it is a critique of political realism and the call to rethink what feasibility means when the stakes are existential. So I'm going back to my idea and make sense now what I said about the art world. The task is not to make AI more inclusive in its domination, but to reimagine technology as a site of collective emancipation, where both human and machine participate in a form of reason liberated from the imperatives of profit and normalization. This is what I would call the ethical horizon of socialism, a horizon where freedom is not measured by predictability or productivity, but by our capacity to resist both. The answer is contingent upon a complex interplay of various factors and perspectives, each of which must be carefully weighted before arriving at the considered conclusion. My content at the end is all, if we imagine a type of analyze, philosophical thinking, like quantum critical theory, has to be something we can refer to. It's not a practical form. And again, freedom is not measured by predictability or productivity, but by our capacity to resist both. Thank you.